I click the go live button just to verify that we have a stream on YouTube, and we will start. Yeah, so hello and welcome to our today's webinar. Today we're going to talk about artifact management for the cloud native, and we are going to introduce a concept that we are calling the Universal Kubernetes Registry. Your speakers today are William Manning, a senior solution architect at JFrog, at William Manning on Twitter. And he is with us from the great New York City, representing JFrog at AWS Summit.
Yes, the Summit one. Yeah, and then tomorrow is AWS Ecosystem Day. And if you happen to be down at WeWorks down here in Lower Manhattan tomorrow, I'll be presenting around 10:15 tomorrow and talking for a little while about the similar subject we have here today.
Here you go. Yeah, so definitely don't miss if you are at the summit and here, Bill, not only here but also there. And my name is Baruch. I'm developer advocate with JFrog at JBaruch on Twitter. Should follow both of us. We are very interesting and entertaining people. Yeah, and before we start, let me fire up a short poll for you here to kind of gauge the level of the audience and for us to adjust the conversation to the right level. So we will start with this one, and this is kind of two questions, basically your knowledge of Artifactory and JFrog products and your knowledge of containers and Kubernetes. Do you see the poll? No one votes. Oh, here we go.
No.
Yeah. No, you shouldn't. That's not for you. Your questions. By the way, did you see? Look at the t-shirts.
Wait, we have the same one on?
Yes, it's like we actually plotted it, but we didn't.
We're like bi-coastal wardrobe buddies here, you know?
Yeah. We will give like 5 more seconds to this poll, and then we will see where we are standing.
And just so everybody knows today, I mean, one of the things that we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about actually like some real life scenarios, and we'll show some examples using, in this case, Jenkins to produce more of a web services style CI/CD pipeline. And then from there, what we'll be able to do is you'll be able to actually go in, sign up, and download the examples that we're talking about today. We're going to be talking also a little bit about our enterprise platform that's coming. It was announced about 2 months ago. And so it'll be kind of relevant, especially in terms of the world of Kubernetes. So I'll let Baruch take it from here when we get done with this. And
yeah, so just to summarize the results that you see, it's not recorded on our stream to YouTube, so we need to go through it kind of. But the majority of you use some kind of advanced Artifactory features like the build info with multiple packaging types and the enterprise features, and a good percentage of you both using Docker in production and play with Kubernetes. So I guess this is good. It's a good place to start, and with that, I'm going to go through one of my favorite explanations of where JFrog stands in the world of software engineering, and to make sure that we all are on the same page. And Bill, of course, feel free to join this explanation. So, whoa, that happens like a lot. My PowerPoint crashes during sharing with Zoom. I wonder why that happens. So give me 1 second. I will recover and we will take it from there. I'm really sorry about that. It's not the first time it happens. Yeah, you go ahead. You talk about what people should expect while setting it up.
Yeah, no worries. Hey, guys, also, just so you know, we're also doing another webinar on the 31st of this month, and it's called Are You Ready for Enterprise Plus? We'll be covering some of the topics here. I think it's very important that we discuss this. But also, one of the things I want to emphasize as we're getting ready to bring it up and what Baruch is about to show is, before I joined JFrog, I had my own startups and things like that. And I was a big advocate for a thing called 12 factors. Now, 12 factors is a way for you to develop applications in a very, in a very robust manner. The whole, it doesn't work on my machine, being able to alleviate a lot of the standard pressures and stuff, things like that. And using Docker and Kubernetes and producing web services like what I used to do. A lot of the topics we're going to discuss here is more from like a developer point of view, a CI/CD master point of view. Being that DevOps guru. So when you come in, being able to have that automated, we have that release faster release faster die mentality, and the whole thing is that having that fast ability to move and bring stuff to market. This will be really good examples of that. So I'll let Baruch take over and discuss these series of slides, and we can go from there.
Yeah. So unless this crashes again and we decide to go directly to demo, let's try and do this more theoretical part. So what I wanted to explain is kind of the way people write software and deliver software today, and how JFrog and JFrog products fit in. And as you will all agree with me, everything starts with developers writing code. And they use different tools, they use different languages. And today it's very prominent that all of us use third-party libraries and open source components in our code. And today's software engineering is mostly writing glue between different components which are out there by now. Wherever you use, whatever language or type of code you write, starting from programming languages like Java and Go and JavaScript and .NET, all the way to writing Ansible roles and Chef cookbooks and Docker build files, it's all using different components that need to go and fetch dependencies from the internet. And when they fetch dependencies from the internet, they go to some kind of repository or registry, which are different terminology for the same concept of this is my central place where my dependencies are. And if you take your software development seriously, you will have some kind of in-house repository registry. And of course, our suggestion will be JFrog Artifactory. You might decide you want it on-prem. You might decide you want it on the cloud. You might decide you want it on any cloud, AWS, Google Cloud Platform, Azure, whatever. JFrog Artifactory supports all those flavors and all those options for you. And once you requested those artifacts, if you don't already have them in Artifactory, Artifactory will go ahead and fetch them from remote repositories, being it for JCenter or even Maven Central for Java, NuGet Gallery for NuGet, NPM Registry for NPM. Wherever it goes, it will fetch those repositories, store them in Artifactory, and once the artifacts are getting into Artifactory, JFrog X-Ray will kick in, scanning those packages for stuff like security vulnerabilities and licenses using external data sources like the National Vulnerability Database and others. So after those artifacts are scanned, they will be returned to the developer, and the developer will successfully build on their local machine whatever they are trying to build. Once this is done, the next step is committing the changes to version control system, and this is where the CI servers kick in. So again, any CI server, they will take the changes from version control and will run the exactly same build using exactly the same tools that our developer used in the first stage. And those tools will eventually need the same packages, the same third-party dependencies that our developer used in the first stage, and will resolve them from Artifactory again. This time, they will absolutely guaranteeing to be resolved because they already found and cached in Artifactory from the stage number 3 that we spoke earlier. And now when they're cached, of course, the build will be faster, and on the successful completion of this build, our CI server will create live artifacts, your product. And those artifacts will be deployed back to Artifactory together with what we called a build info. Build info, bill of materials. It's a piece of metadata about how your build went. And here we enter the entire discussion of the importance of metadata that we will mention multiple times today, because all we do is gathering metadata, searching metadata, and making decisions based on metadata. And this is the first step. The metadata about how the artifacts were created is one of the most important pieces of metadata out there, and they are collected in the CI server. There are multiple ways to collect it. We might plug into your server, into your CI server. In case of Jenkins plugin, for example, we might plug into your build tool. In case of, for example, Maven plugin or Gradle plugin, or you might use JFrog CLI command line interface to provide this information to Artifactory, to collect this information during the build and then provide it to Artifactory together with the artifact. Regardless of how this information is collected, it will be used further down the road to make the decisions regarding the artifacts. But that's not the only information based on which you want to make decisions. There are a lot of others. So, for example, JFrog X-Ray will definitely provide additional metadata to your decision making, whether you have security vulnerabilities, if they are critical, what are the licenses, are you allowed to use those licenses. This is part of metadata as well, and also your general quality assurance and quality control tools like testing, manual QA, stress testing, different quality control tools like SonarQube. All those contribute more and more metadata to the point when you need to make a decision. And this decision will be, should those artifacts be promoted through the different quality gates all the way to production. The artifacts that you decided that should be promoted will be eventually deployed to production. If you are talking about on-prem software that you deploy on the servers that are in your control, you will use tools like Chef, Puppet, obviously Docker and Kubernetes to take the software that you wrote and start running it on your servers. And this is what today's webinar is about. But there might very well be software that need to be distributed and not deployed either to public distribution. And for that, you can use JFrog Bintray, our distribution hub, to power your download center in your organization. If people need to download your software and install it and run it, JFrog Bintray is a good solution to take that headache out of your hands. And if we are talking about internal distribution, you need to push your software to different edge servers across the world. We have a solution for that as well. It's called JFrog Distribution. It will distribute your artifacts to Artifactory edge nodes, and that's a part of our new offering, our Enterprise Plus version of our platform that, as Bill already mentioned, we will discuss on the 31st of this month.
And really quick, just one more thing, by the way. And when we show distribution and we show the edge nodes, that's actually, like I said, the Enterprise Plus platform. But we're also going to be showing you how to build out your Helm charts. We're going to talk about the container, using Artifactory as a container registry. And if you need to, you can utilize Artifactory itself. The only thing that edge and distribution does, it makes that deployment much easier. It's always easy all around, but at the same time, one thing that we're discussing is release bundles, which is a way for you to have it pushed out through distribution to the edge nodes as a unified package for distribute, running it in, say if you're on Amazon EKS, or if you're on Azure on AKS, any one of the, Kubernetes cloud instance systems that are out there.
Yeah, but that's on the 31st. Now let's get back to the business of today. And now, Bill, to you, let's just fire up a demo and talk through it.
All right.
I'm stopping my share now and take it from there.
Excellent. Thank you, Baruch. And let me share my screen here for a minute. So what we're going to do today is, we're going to talk about kind of an end-to-end scenario. So I'm showing mission control here, but I'm going to go into Jenkins for a minute. And since Jenkins is, where the CI/CD world lives in this case, and since we're talking about a real-world scenario where I might have two groups that produce some sort of application that can be used as a web service in our instance for this case, and The demo that I'm showing you today, like I said, will be available for you to go and try and utilize. But I figured I'd start here to kind of explain to you where we're going with this. Now, one of the things that's good about this example is that it's a fairly straight ahead example, but it's a true example. And I will be showing also and covering the Groovy scripts that are involved. So we're using DSL in this case for our steps. And I'll show you how you can utilize, say, like in Jenkins or any other CI server, by the way, you can utilize the plugins that we provide from JFrog itself, but also too, you can use that in conjunction with our CLI tool, which is a fantastic way to do things also. Or if you're scripting out, instead of using a build server of sorts, you can actually go through and script things out using the CLI. And we'll also talk about the API too, and how not only does a plugin provide you with more baseline level integration, it's very symbiotic in this relationship with Jenkins, but also by utilizing the CLI or the API, you can enhance that functionality and make it more geared personally to what your organization is more utilized for. So let's start off with talking about the example we're going to discuss, and then I'm going to go do a quick tour with Artifactory. And Baruch brought up a very good example, very good information about build info. We'll talk about build info. I'll also talk about in one of the steps how to create the Helm chart, how to create a release bundle, and then distribution. And we'll show you those steps and what they mean. So this way it kind of piques your interest on what you can do. And with JFrog, when we talk to customers who come to us and ask us for advice, and we try to give best practices and things like that, we like to discuss, how to utilize the system, what you can do with it, but we're not going to tell your organization how to do things because it's your organization. So let's talk about the first set of steps here. So if you can see my screen, okay. Baruch, does it look okay on the screen?
It looks great.
Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to do is the first step is we actually have a standard Gradle app. In this case, it's just a web server that will live inside of my container. So my end user deployment in this will be is actually a Kubernetes, deployment. So first step I have here is actually a Gradle application, like I said, as a web service. The next phase we have here is a Node.js front end that will live on top of that web service. That one's also being stored and utilized in Artifactory. Now, the thing is that the entire examples we're showing here, Artifactory is like a conveyor belt through the entire process. It's the common layer between everything that allows you to go from that idea of like, I've got my web server, I've got my front end. I'm now going to put it into a Docker container, right? So I'm going to pull the dependencies down from Artifactory to compose my Docker container. And then we're going to actually create, and like I said, this is all scripted out. We'll create a Helm chart around this and then have that Helm chart packaged up into a release bundle. And now a release bundle is basically an immutable bundle, right? So it's a final product release that you want to deploy out there. And what it is it allows you to combine different types of packages together. So in this case, I'm actually going to be packaging a Helm chart and a Docker container and putting that as a release bundle. From there, I'm going to say, okay, now that I've created this bundle, what do I do with it? Well, in this case, I'm actually going to push it out to my edge nodes. Now, I'll explain how my system is set up and how this will be deployed, but this will push it out to, in this case, we're going to be pushing out to EKS just because of where I'm hosting the solution currently now. Like I said, it could be any container service you want to utilize. And then lastly is the step here where I'll actually use the Helm commands to actually deploy the actual my web service out into service and have it operational. All right, so let's talk about the way we have things organized for our Artifactory, for our entire ecosystem in this case. So that I have here, I have, Jenkins. I have 4 sites in this case. So I have my primary US site where I have a Artifactory server. I've got an X-Ray server, and we'll talk about X-Ray too. And I have a really good example, by the way, when we were talking about metadata, is I'm actually using a scanning portion of it to scan my Docker containers. And I'm actually producing a scan for it. But what I'm doing is I'm actually pushing it to a webhook. So if I have a third-party monitoring service, I can see all the information in a security format around my Docker container. So then I also have a distribution server living in my US cluster. That's where I'm going to be packaging up the Helm chart and the Docker container together. And then lastly, I have mission control, which I'm showing you right now. And I have a team in India, and in India, I have another Artifactory server. And what they're doing in this case is I have around the clock, I follow the Sun methodology of development. So what I'm doing is I'm replicating between the two. In this case, if I am doing any sort of builds, it allows me to have that global reach of development. I then have an edge server that I have here in the EU, because my edge server in this case is the one that I'm utilizing for a European deployment. And I also have another one, and I have another server that's actually in China. So I have an edge server in China too, and I'm able to go now do global deployments and have a globally scalable development team. So let's go in and go into Artifactory for a minute. So you guys, if you guys want a full view of what Artifactory is, let's make sure I'm logged in because it's probably going to make me log in here. Give me 1 sec. I just got to get into my cert. Here we go. And in Artifactory, we'll give you the 5-cent tour here. But the main things that we're going to be focusing on today is the fact of the creation of the Helm chart. So, the fact we are using, the build portion of Artifactory to store not only the binaries, say like when I'm building my Docker container, I'm caching in those initial layers that I'm building my containers off of, also all the dependencies for like the Java web service, all my node, so all my NPM, my node modules, I'm storing those in Artifactory. Also, storing the Helm chart, it's all there. So if you look through my build steps, you can see where it corresponds to my Jenkins job. So if we take a look at the first job that we have here, like I said, it's just a simple Gradle app that I'm building. And I were to go into Artifactory and I wanted to look at how it was created. I'm not going to go too deep into it just because, you guys have probably seen some of this before. And if you haven't, you'll be able to go through it later on.
And although it goes to exactly that build step of CI server that we showed previously in the diagram, when you have your any CI server using plugins in terms of Jenkins, you're going to show the groovy code in the middle in a minute, or the CLI extensions that you can build, and eventually what we gather in those CI servers is the build info that you are showing now.
Exactly. So the thing is that like I wanted to kind of show you that when this is being deployed, you can see where we have all the artifacts that are being created. You have all your environmental variables and all your system variables around this. Any sort of issues. You have all this information in there, and having that is that's the nice part about Artifactory is having that single source of truth where you can store it all together. And as Baruch said earlier in the slide deck, is that when my developers are developing, so the same library dependencies that they're utilizing are the same ones that when I go into these steps here, say in Jenkins, they're the same library. So there's that whole consistency. With Artifactory, when it comes down to its simplest terms, it's consistency from your developer all the way to deployment, developer to device, code to cloud. There's many different terminologies we use internally to describe what we do, but that's really the quintessential part. And the metadata that's produced around that, and the fact that you can enhance that metadata even on top of that to produce even more relevant metadata that's pertinent to your organization is very important. Now this, if I look at this, the what I have here, let me just log in for a minute. Let me go in here. Oops, let me make sure I got the right password. Give me 1 minute here. Sorry about that. Let's log in. Okay, let's update that password. And if I look at the configuration for this, I have some, it's a very standard, nothing, exciting, too terribly exciting. It's what you would see when you create any sort of build step. And if you look in here, you can see where I'm passing in, just basically using the Gradle tool. I'm passing in credentials. But then I have this Groovy script down here. It's hard to see in this method. So let me actually share my IDE here. Let me bring that up. Oops. Let me try that again. And if you look here, you can see that in my IDE for step 1, it's a very simplistic example, right? It's just very much about getting my code out of my GitHub repository. I'm actually, in this case, I'm actually defining, because here's one thing is that I have the plugin installed in Jenkins that my DSL scripts, because of that, are actually contextually aware of what Artifactory is. So I can utilize the function calls in this case. So I'm connecting to an Artifactory server. I'm actually collecting all the build information. If you look here, I'm defining the build info. And then I'm just performing a simple Gradle build. But the biggest thing at the end of this all is I'm actually publishing all that information back to Artifactory, right? So if you look here, Artifactory, publish info. So now I've taken it, I've gathered all that. Now I've gathered that metadata. And yes, you can go into Jenkins and look at like the past 5 builds and get that information. But, having it actually, stored, this metadata is stored with the actual artifacts that are being produced is very paramount. And if we were to go to the second step, I'm using the plugin in this case, right? I'm using the Artifactory plugin. And then, in the second step where I'm creating this node application, it's actually a combination here. This one here, once again, I am connected to my Artifactory server. I am collecting all the build information, and I'm going through. But I'm also, in this case, I've got the CLI. I'm installing the CLI as part of the build process. So we have some code here to show you how you can pull the CLI, have it installed during your build process, run it. And in this case, I'm actually utilizing that to publish the build artifacts back into Artifactory. I'm taking that and I'm also saying I want to scan this. So I can actually scan the build too. Having that kind of ability to customize this more to what my packages and my package types are and how my organization operates allows us to go in and manipulate the build process so it's more stable and robust towards what we're trying to do.
Yep. So let's say I wanted to switch gears, looking at the time here, and actually get to the later parts of our pipelines. Once we already have the Gradle app and the UI app, now the question is how we're going to Dockerize it and then take it to Kubernetes, and how the Kubernetes registry, being Artifactory, actually helps and gives additional value than just being like Maven repository, npm registry, and Docker registry separately.
Absolutely. So I think a good way to talk about that here is, let me go jump into step 3. So I showed you step 3 for a second. Step 3 is we're actually building the Docker container. And we go through the steps here and the stages in which we're doing it here. And once again, I'm grabbing my example. By the way, all these examples we're showing here are also on our GitHub page. So our GitHub training page, and you can see all the examples. Go in and look at all these scripts that we created here for you. And if you look here, I'm actually going through, and the first thing I'm doing is actually I'm grabbing the dependencies, right? So I'm going and I'm grabbing those I'm grabbing the other 2 builds that I did. So here's the WAR file that I'm grabbing from Gradle, and then of course here's the npm. I'm taking those, and then we have the stages and steps here where I'm actually building the Docker container itself. So I'm using the dependencies that I pulled down, and I'm constructing the Docker container around that. And if I ran the build deploy step, you would actually be able to see it, go in, construct that out. And once again, though, I am collecting all the build information. So I'm actually collecting all that build metadata around that Docker container. And I'll show you that when we get done with this next section. But also, because I'm using the plugin and I'm also using the CLI and also the API, I'm also able to go in and add additional tests. So I've got a simple test here where what I'm doing is I'm actually grabbing that container I just created and pushed into Artifactory as my registry. I'm pulling that down, and I'm actually retagging it as latest, number 1. Number 2, I'm actually going through and I'm testing that. But I'm using the API itself that if it passes my test, it'll actually produce more metadata. It'll say, it passed my functional test. I'm untaking this, and we'll talk about this in a minute too, is I've added a step in here. We talked about X-ray and what X-ray provides, and I'll show you a result of what happens when I scan a Docker container and the results you get. But the thing is I'm actually going through, and in this case, I'm just printing out the results. But one of the other things I'm also doing is I'll show you I have this pushing to a webhook, because maybe I want to notify my security team that there's a vulnerability in my Docker container. Now, one of the things that we do here, what we'll be discussing, and by the way, next month on the 14th, I'll be giving a talk about it. It's called Planning and Promotion. But the thing is that you should set up your repository so you have staging and production and maybe some dev or whatever. We have a promotion API. And when it passes my functional test and it passes my X-ray scanning, it says, this is safe and it's functional. I can promote it from the source repository, my staging repository in this case, and promote it into my production repository. So now I've got a system of record on where it went from my staging to my production, and it has all the metadata surrounding that. And so having all these little components, being able to utilize this in a CI/CD solution allows you now to construct it, quantitate it, test it, automate it, and also store the metadata. So if I were to, when I produce this build, and we go back in here, and let's go take a look at step 3. So if we go in here and we scroll down and we look for step 3, which is my Docker application, you can see this is the build I have here. You can see all the layers that were produced. So these are all those Docker layers that we discussed when you create it. Here's all the dependencies. So here's that web front end UI, and here's the web services portion of it.
And this is where the universal nature of Kubernetes registry actually shines, right? If we just were to install a simple Maven repository like Nexus or whatever, and then just install a simple npm registry and have a Docker registry, maybe a DTR or even the open source registry, we would still have all those artifacts inside the organization deployed, but there were no reasonable correlation to show between them, as you can see here. Once we have all the artifacts in the same tool together, we can navigate through them. We can see them as dependencies. We can make decisions. We can query about them. We can ask questions like, give me all the artifacts which were part of this Docker image. And this is the importance of the universal Kubernetes registry on top of just bunch of different tools.
And one of the things, by the way, I just want to add to that quickly, and I'll just cover just for a second, is one of the powerful features of this is by using Artifactory for, say, the container registry, is that trying to remediate or debug something that's happening with a container, especially in a web services model, becomes easier because I can go in here and I can actually do a diff between two Docker containers to see what's changed between one and the other. So that's one additional function that you can go in. So now we talked about I have a Docker container stored now. So let's go back in and let's go to step 4. I want to create, now I want to create the actual Helm chart, to do this. So, once again, we're in another groovy step, right? So this is another step inside of Jenkins. And you can see in here, once again, I'm actually using, the JFrog CLI in this case, to go in and actually, in this case, I'm connected, I'm passing up, I'm creating I'm actually writing the YAML values that I'm going to utilize for the deployment of this, for the Helm chart. I'm taking it, I'm storing it. I can now put it into Artifactory, and now having it stored there after I've done the creation. And like I said, this will all be available for you guys to utilize there. Having that using in this case, I'm actually also, by the way, just so you know, when we're constructing this Helm chart, we're using AQL, which is our Artifactory query language, to go query Artifactory to say, tell me what the latest Docker build is. And by utilizing that, I'm always ensured that if I'm using the latest tagged version of that Docker container, that when I can produce the YAML file that's going to be for my Docker Helm chart, that I'm always assured I've got the latest one. So I'm always pulling the latest one in, and this is a combination of AQL and also our CLI to make sure that I get the latest one when I'm constructing this. If you look here in this section, you can see the curl command where I'm passing in that AQL query, and the results that I have, I'm actually creating the Helm chart around this.
Yes, and this is AQL. We of course show here very, I would say, classical usage. We need to find the different dependencies to download, and of course record the file that we downloaded into build info and everything. But it's actually much more powerful than that, and you can use it in any scope. So. It knows about all the metadata of the files, both explicit, like we have here, it was the part of the build, etc., but also implicit, like path and size and number of downloads and who deployed it. And it allows you to do any kind of query about any artifact in your universal artifact repository for actually any purpose. Think about cleanup, think about selecting artifacts for promotion, think about picking the right ones to be downloaded to dependencies. All of them are actually possible using Artifactory query language.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is like, one of the emphasis because of expediency of time and for questions at the end, yes, absolutely. I always emphasize to people that AQL, a lot of people don't know what it is, and utilizing it, allows you extreme robustness, especially when you're utilizing Artifactory for storage of any of your binaries. Now, once we have this Helm chart created, we would go to step 5, which is the next one, which is now we're going to package it up together. And once again, we are going to be utilizing a couple different functions here. We're going to be actually utilizing a couple different options for Artifactory again. So we are going to be connecting using the plugin. We're going to be using the CLI, and also too, we're actually going to be composing this all together and pushing this once again back into Artifactory. And we'll go back into Artifactory in a minute, so this way you can see. But the whole thing here is now that I've got a Docker container, I've got my web service, I've got my UI, I've got my Docker container, I now have a Helm chart. Now I want to package them all together. So this way it's a release. Right now I have a release that I can utilize. And if you look in this, I mean, it gets a little messy. There are a lot of slashes and a lot of things we have to escape, in using a groovy script. But you can see here, once again, we're using simple JSON. We're using simple information to construct that release bundle. And when we construct that release bundle, and we've used that same methodology of composing, compiling it, putting it together, building that as a unit and setting it back into Artifactory, we now have an atomic unit that we can take. It's immutable. We have it as a release. We mark it as such, and now we can take it and we can distribute it out to our edge nodes where we can do things like deploy a web service itself. So if you look here, you can see where I'm actually getting the Helm chart version. I'm utilizing AQL. This is more of a functional approach. Usually, we're not really spending too much time, if you notice, inside of Artifactory itself, but we're showing you how to utilize it as your central hub for this kind of operation. It should be there, cheap for you to use, and then you can utilize it. So, these examples show where I'm doing that. I'm also getting the latest version of the Helm charts. I'm pulling those together, and then that's where I'm constructing my unit of measure that I'm going to actually have as my web service. Now, we're going to step over to step 6, and then we'll go back to Artifactory. Now, in step 6 here, this is where we're getting into where now I have a release bundle. I know it's there. It's been pushed out, so I have a dependency build where step 5 is step 6. And like I said, this is all I could check in my code and queue off this entire process if I wanted to. But now I'm actually going through and I'm actually grabbing that release bundle, and I'm going to say, give me a list of all the edge nodes. So in this case, I've got those 2 edge nodes, one in China, one in the EU, and tell me what they are, and now take it. And using the curl command I have here, I'm going to use the distribute payload. So I'm actually going to distribute that payload out to those actual edge nodes. Now, the edge nodes themselves, in this case in the Enterprise Plus platform, is simply more of a streamlined version of Artifactory that allows you to have more of a read functionality from where if you're going to distribute it to a customer, to other products, or to deploy it to a web service. So, like I said, these examples are here. And then, of course, last but not least, if I was to automate all this, we have the example of where we're just using the simple Helm. We're connecting to Artifactory, pulling that release bundle, and deploying it out. I think now I should hop back into Artifactory. What do you think, Baruch? Do you think we should go into that?
So I think that's exactly the way you kind of script the entire process, those steps. Each and every one of them is kind of reiterating the circle that we showed in our diagram. For each and every build, we go through the entire stage of creating the package, deploying it to Artifactory, creating the package, deploying it to Artifactory. Pass this, going to production with Kubernetes, we will obviously only use the big packages that include the small ones, but the small ones are of the importance. We keep track of them, we record them, we have the build info on them as well.
Right. And so when we talk about Artifactory, we're going in, here's all those steps. And when you guys are going through and maybe playing with the system, even down here to the Helm chart, if we look in here, you can see where we're storing it. You can see the contents behind it, right? We package it up. If I want to go jump right into the browser in Artifactory, it's sitting right there. Some of the other things that you can see when we go into step 4 in this case, once again, environmental variables, any issues. We talk about release history. Now let's just go back for one quick sec, and say we are looking at that Docker application here. I was talking about promotion. And you can see where we actually have the system of record here where I've actually promoted this from my staging environment up into my production environment. Now, I'm going to skip ahead for a second because you see the Docker container, you see the Helm chart that we created. And then here, if you look here, here's distribution. And you can look, here's the application that we've created, right? So if you look, these are the AQL queries that were actually being utilized where we're saying, when we stored it, we stored that AQL query to say, here's the actual Helm chart, and here's the Docker container. I can also break down the content, so you can see where I have the Docker image, and you can see the Helm chart. So when I'm deploying this out, I know what I'm sending out. I can look at that, the builds that are behind it. So these are directly correlated back to the actual builds that produced it, including the artifact, the build numbers that are corresponding to this. And these build numbers, by the way, correspond back into Artifactory. If you look here, here's 166. And also the number of artifacts that are actually contained inside of it. You can also apply release notes to this. I don't have a release notes in this case, but also the next step is you can actually check to see where things have been actually distributed out to. Now, constructing these can be done, like I said, automatically. We showed you that. But we can also go through, and if we wanted to, and you can actually clone out other release bundles, clone a release bundle and make modifications to it if you wanted to. You have to give it a different, semantic versioning number, add a description. And we have all the pieces down here where you can go in and add in markup, whatever you need to do. Here's the actual constructed queries. item find, repo, Helm, and I passed it in a value. This was actually done via that script. So when we created that script automatically in Jenkins, where we compile this and we stored it, it was being stored here, and here's all that query data behind it. And then I could take this and I can, I now created a new version of this bundle. And if I wanted to, I can go in, pick my edge nodes. We automated it in the other steps, but I can also manually distribute it out. I can also do it via the CLI. And if I went to my edge nodes down here, we have the area in here where you can see, the release bundles themselves, where they've actually been distributed out. Like I just actually did 167, we just discussed. It's already pushed out to my edge node. It's now ready for consumption. So when I showed you in the last step where I had it in Jenkins, where I was going, where I'm deploying it as a web service, here's what it looks like, right? And I can see the path here that when I'm connecting to that edge node, I'm extracting that, running the Helm commands, and Kubernetes CTL or whatever service, EKS has its own set of commands. I can put those together, execute them, and now I have an end-to-end service from the creation of the web service all the way down to the deployment of the web service itself into a pod in a Kubernetes cluster, and I can also send out to multi-region, multi-zone, or whatever you need. So that's kind of the end-to-end on this. And then we have a few minutes left. We can start taking some questions, or Brooke, how you want to handle this. But should I just touch on one more thing? Could I just kind of show X-ray for a second?
Yes, we definitely should, because we mentioned it in the diagram and spoke about how it is an important source of metadata to make those decisions on which artifacts need to be promoted or not. So definitely we need to speak about X-ray.
Absolutely. So let's talk about X-ray for a second. So, in X-ray, when you're connected, once again, it's a symbiotic relationship between Artifactory and X-ray. They work together. It gives you the ability to go in and look at various builds, various types, be able to scan down to a very granular level. Now, I'm going to tell you right now that the container we built here is actually, if you were to look at it, it's actually pretty much a disaster. It's actually filled with a lot of bad things, a lot of bad components. But, that was done on purpose. So, if I do a search, say, like in any of my Docker builds that I have here, and let's say I look at let's see my Docker multi-app in this area here, you can see, that what we're doing is we're breaking down the violations. You can see all the security problems. This actually contains the struts issue that caused a lot of issues. You can see the licensing actually contained inside of this container. Try to find all the licenses inside of a Docker container. Good luck. Here you go. We break it down for you. I can also tell you what repository is in, but let's look at the violations specifically. So if I click in here, you can see where I've got the Docker build. I actually have the layer inside that Docker container I created. Here's the WAR file living inside of that layer. And then here's a jar living inside of that jar, living inside of that layer, inside of that build. That shows you how granular we go down, that we will actually dive deep into that container. Now, if I click into here, here's the important part. We have, by the way, we have CVE information over here. Here's the infected versions. But say I actually go directly to this one. Now, this is the important step. Once again, list of violation, licenses, the location. In terms of remediation now, I can go in and tell you every other affected repository that this jar file is part of. Now, that's very important. So now I can actually alert other teams. I can talk to other units and say, by the way, this version of struts in this case is bad. You need to fix it. Go away. Do your thing.
And a couple of comments here. First of all, it's obviously not limited to containers only in any way or form. JFrog X-Ray is a universal tool as the rest of the JFrog portfolio, and we will analyze any combination of artifacts, any level depth. So if you are not using Docker and instead you distribute your software as Debian packages or RPM packages, we'll be able to scan those as well. Inside, we'll be able to find different types of archives, starting from zip files all the way to Java, as we saw, npm, NuGet, whatever archives of packages you deploy, all of them will be scanned recursively, and we will show you the same deep analysis that you saw in this example with Docker and Java.
And there's another important part of this too, by the way. So I had a customer recently, and this kind of like, it'll take us 2 seconds to describe, but we have a customer that every time they do a Docker container build, they want a FOSS record. So they want a free, they want a version, they want to look at all the open source, they want to look at all the libraries that are contained inside of the image. In this case, this Docker container. And what you can do is you can hook up a webhook to, in this case, they have a ledger in which they have everything pumped into. And it would look something like this. So this is exactly a list of all the components that we've done deep level scanning on, their vulnerabilities, their linkage, even down to their checksum and where they come from, down to the name. And they use this, they produce a catalog in which they can go in and have a record of everything contained in that Docker image, every single dependency, everything is being utilized. And that's all being produced by X-Ray, and it's being published to a webhook. And then that webhook, they munge the data, they put it into a catalog, and it goes from there. So it's just another effort you can do, where if you need to have that idea where you need a ledger of every open source component or every library dependency component, you can use X-Ray to actually scan that, get that information, and post it somewhere.
Yep. And also another point that I wanted to make here is that now we showed one direction of examining stuff in JFrog, and that going from the image all the way down to its components. You can also go vice versa. So once you learned about some security vulnerability, for example, you heard the news about Equifax, and now you want to make sure that you don't have these threats in any of your components or containers or whatever, you can do an impact analysis starting from this jar all the way back to all the components that are impacted by this jar.
And what's great is that with the new version, especially of what we're doing with X-Ray, we now have policies. And now with policies allow you to go through. And, with X-Ray, we talk about the builds and everything like that. But one of the things you can also do is, Baruch talked about it before, is that if you are using third-party libraries, which everybody does, you can actually set up a watcher and a policy rule to say, block downloaded artifacts. If they don't meet our criteria as an organization, stop the usage of them. But also you can say block unscanned artifacts when you apply a policy to a repository level. And that allows you to say, if somebody requests it, they're proxying through Artifactory because of the way Artifactory's nature, and say, do not allow usage of this artifact until it's met our criteria. So by defining that policy allows you to have that, first level of defense all the way from the developer all the way down. So you can actually stop it at the developer level if you wanted to.
Yes. And I think with that we kind of we have some time for questions, and everybody are more than welcome to ask additional questions. I will get back to my slides here because I want to show you the most important slide of today, and this is this. A lot of questions that we've been asked while we've been through this demo is how can people get a hand on it, and how can they try it, and how can they get the same environment, where can they see the scripts, and this kind of questions. And actually the URL that you need to keep in mind is try.jfrog.com. When you go there, you will be able to get the exact same demo that Bill showed us today, with all the JFrog products and other products already configured, and all the info, the same builds are already there. There is a user guide that will take you step by step through all that, with the links to all the scripts and Jenkins files and what's not. So while you are working on sending us more questions, let me ask you a question as well. We would really be interested in getting a feedback from you on how this webinar went. Did it answer your expectations? So let me, and it crashed again. Let me start this poll. I think you should supposed to see it right now.
And Baruch, I realized that probably we could have made this easily a 2-hour webinar when if we want to really go deep in detail.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And while people are voting, I hope they will. Here you go. About the quality of today's material, let's go through some questions. So, on top of where can we get all this goodness, and that consider it answered by going to try.jfrog.com, there are a couple of interesting ones. So, for example, is there a way to see a promotion of artifacts among the environments? Bill,
Sorry. I actually lost connection there for a second. I
Oh,
couldn't
right.
hear what
Okay. Yeah. So the question was, is there a way to see a promotion of artifacts among environments?
I guess what do you mean by among environments? I guess I would probably need. I mean, are you talking about? Are you asking about? Different deployment environments or across environment? That's what I'm trying to
So
determine.
that was an anonymous question, so I'm not sure whom to address the follow-up question to, but I would say there are two directions to look at. The first will be a mission control with JFrog mission control with insights, which will give you a picture of artifact promotion status between different environments. I think that will be the answer. The other would be if we are talking about a distribution process of
Correct.
the artifacts go from the central Artifactory repository to all those Artifactory edges. Again, mission control will give you will monitor the process of the distribution and JFrog distribution itself.
Yeah, and that also falls into like I said, the other talk I'll be giving next month, which is also part of it and part of the planning and stuff like that, is the idea of the producer-consumer model. So if you are going cross environments where Team A produces for Team B and Team C has an input into Team B, like where you're bringing different teams together, you can actually utilize the metadata, by the way, for the origin portion of that. Where I've done this recently, where if I am promoting cross teams and things like that, you can put in digital signatures, like you might want to put in the metadata, or you might want to put in any sort of gates. So utilizing the properties inside of there to say where things are in the process or where the origin was from or different environments where it was produced. That's another way to do it too.
Yep. Another comment here, more than a question, is which version the policies were introduced into X-Ray?
It's the latest version, the one that actually was just recently released last week. So that's the new change that we're doing in X-Ray. And by the way, the policy portion is still the same thing that you had in Actions before. So in the previous version of X-Ray, it was all combined together, but we granulated it out into having watches and then having policies. This way, because we had a lot of requests for people to have improved policy management, so you can make more, you can make more multi-layer, kind of depends, gates on it, as opposed to before, which was a little more limiting. So you actually have more flexibility in the new versions that are coming out. And also, by the way, X-Ray now is HA. You can make X-Ray HA. So that made a lot of sense for us to have that policy, improved policy management.
Yeah. And I think the last question for today, if our build process combines the artifact creation, Docker build, and publish in a single Jenkins job, and we get that a lot, would it affect how X-Ray separates the layers or how to configure that? So there is if you have separate jobs, you can configure those watches based on this job in X-Ray, and you will see the results per each job. But even if you have a single job that only deploys the top level artifact to Artifactory, that won't affect the ability of X-Ray to scan and analyze the artifacts, because, as I mentioned, it is scanned and analyzed recursively. So you will still see the layers, you will still see the bullseye that will show you where the artifacts are. It will just be a matter of you will have a watch on a single build because that's the only build you have. Right, Bill?
Correct. And like you said, and actually, even if you were to separate it out by those steps, you can still separate it, like you said, inside the process itself. So if you did have, different stages, you could address each stage independently, including collecting the build information for that stage and publishing that separately. So you can still keep it separated inside of Artifactory, even as it is one build.
Yep, exactly. And there is another question, and I think we can try and take that. I'm not sure I understood it, so I'll read it out loud and we will try to figure it out together. I would like to have access to an example of the publishing the build info use cases. Okay, that they want an example of use cases for build info using just the REST API. I guess that means JFrog CLI, right?
Yeah, or the REST API, actually. You can actually do it via the REST API, too.
It's just easier with JFrog CLI. That includes the artifacts themselves, well, obviously, collected issues and Git shas for multiple repos.
So actually, let me address one quick thing on this. So when you mentioned the CLI, just so everybody's aware, the big difference between using the API and the CLI is that the CLI is checksum aware. So if you're familiar with Artifactory and how we do artifact management using checksum, the CLI is checksum aware. So if you do upload or you do things like that, it'll calculate the checksum first, determine whether or not it's already been stored in Artifactory. If it hasn't been stored in Artifactory, it will upload it. If it has been already created in Artifactory, it will just produce a metadata record behind that. And that's important when doing things like creation of Docker containers, right? It will only upload the actual diff version, right? It'll actually only update the updated layers. So they'll have new checksums because of new values. So that's the one advantage between CLI and the API.
Yeah, and back to the question of gathering the collected issues and Git shas, there is nothing special in it, particularly in the collection process. But when you want to attach this information into the build info, it's really straightforward. Both in REST API and in JFrog CLI, you have the exact command of how to add information to your build info. If you want to script it around REST API, you'll probably work directly on the JSON object of the build info and will add properties either to the build info layer or to the particular artifacts. So for example, if there was an issue that was solved in a particular artifact, you can add that as a property on the artifact itself and then deploy it with those artifacts. It's all, I think, pretty well documented in our REST API and build info sections of our user guide. So feel free to take a look at that. And with that, I would like to thank all the participants for coming, listening, and for the wonderful questions. I would like to thank you, Bill, and wish you luck in the AWS Summit and the part of it where you are actually speaking.
But thanks you, Baruch, for being part of this, and thank you, everybody. I hope that helped out. I wish we had more time, but we'll be around, and we're always around. And
see you all next week on the 31st on the Enterprise Plus webinar. If the parts of Enterprise Plus, especially this distribution and the Artifactory edge nodes, sound like a good fit for one of your problems, make sure you don't miss the one next week. Thank you.
And then also, too, by the way, August 14th, I'll also be talking about planning and promotion, the way we're talking about the 5 Ps. Basically, it's more conceptual. It's more best practices approach on how to utilize Artifactory through your entire process, from planning all the way out to product.
Here you go. So we have a lot of new exciting content coming up as webinars. Make sure you check jeffrog.com/webinars for more of all this goodness. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone.